Alright, hello, and welcome back. I am Pride, and today I want to talk Chaos Dwarf Campaign Mechanics. Now, we got a decent picture of what to expect with the Astrogoth Let's Play, if not an entirely complete one, and obviously, because it was a live recording environment on the last video, and because I didn't want the video to go for like 2 hours or anything, I didn't cover everything I possibly could have, and of course there were other things I didn't catch at all, as it happened in real time. So, for this one, I want to briefly discuss some of the interesting elements that showed up on subsequent rewatches, and I want to go into further detail on the parts that are unconfirmed up to this point, and how I'd like to see those mechanics implemented. Because when you're talking tech as futuristic and powerful as what the Dawizar have access to, especially in comparison to other races of the setting, I'd like to see some envelopes being pushed here, and there are some older Total War games that should provide a nice blueprint and foundation for those kind of features. So let's jump right in. Number one, you may have noticed that the Chaos Dwarfs have unit caps in campaign, much like the Tomb Kings. From a lore perspective, this is very logical. They are, and have always been, small in number ever since the Great Catastrophe, and seeing a 19 stack of Infernal Ironsworn, Immortals, and Kadai Destroyers by turn 60 would be dumb, in the same way that 19 Star Dragons of Kalidor or 19 Necrosphinxes would be. So will have a major role in deciding your army compositions. Obviously, if units are capped, you can't make as many of them as you might like, and it's going to be one of the biggest balancing factors they have in comparison to regular dwarfs who do not have caps. The Dawi, for example, can rush grudge throwers and quarrelers and have a pretty powerful army very early on with dwarf warriors, quarrelers, and those grudge throwers in the back. Chaos Dwarfs, on the other hand, are going to be better on a per model basis. We've already seen stat comparisons between them, but they will be outnumbered and have to rely on hobgoblins and really crappy slave units to pad out their numbers. And if you're worried about orc laborers or goblin slaves being as good as their greenskin compatriots, they are not even close. They have less armor, they have no missile block chance. The orc laborers do have AP, but their stats are absolutely terrible and their leadership is really bad. They will be shredded by artillery or quarreler fire in 5 seconds flat. So I think you'll be relying pretty heavily on Chaos Dwarf starting units to a much higher degree, because the good stuff is going to be capped really hard, which also means Hobgoblin Archers are almost certainly going to make up the bulk of meta builds in campaign, and may even be a factor deep into your playthrough. We've already seen for so many factions how powerful spamming Archers will be. That's not going to change. When you've got 160 models on Hobgoblins, they're going to probably be pretty good. Now I expect Astrogoth to have an emphasis on Bull Centaurs and Kadai. I believe we saw evidence of an innate ward save for Bull Centaurs in his army, probably a unique skill or trait of his, while Drazoath will of course focus on Infernal Guard, Ironsworn, and Taurus as the leader of the Legion of Asgore, and Zatan presumably will have the best Hobgoblins and artillery, but that still remains up in the air. Well, let me clarify, whoever has Gordo's Backstabber will definitely have the best Hobgoblins overall. Seems that's going to be his main purpose as a legendary hero, turning diminutive little hobgobbos into Terminator doom stacks. Might have some dueling prowess on his own. He is a backstabber, he'll probably be an assassin type character, but buffing the hobgoblins will be the more important element of his role. On the infrastructure side, there have been some interesting developments as well. Chaos Dwarfs can build 3 types of settlements. Towers will be your main cities and province capitals. Factories and outposts will be your minor settlements, each with their own building tree and role to play, which means a choice anytime you capture a minor settlement. Do you build infrastructure to churn out armaments generated from factory assembly lines to construct advanced military buildings and empower your units in the Hellforge, which will say give Infernal Guard chaotic runes and other upgrades? Or do you build an outpost which generates raw materials from mines? Raw materials are required to level up your main settlement buildings and generally build up your infrastructure, and as you might imagine, labor directly affects the output of your raw materials. More mines requires more labor, and as that labor dies off, your raw material output will shrink. More slaves equals more raw materials, which means you need to capture slaves via conquest, battle, and trade through your military convoys. More on that in a minute. All this to say, the Chaos Dwarf economy has more moving pieces than most other races in the trilogy. There are more things you may have to balance and maintain to keep things running smoothly. As I said in the last video, now you can't just say, I want money, let me build the money building. You've got more things to balance to make it all work. This may prove to slow them down in the early game, but one thing that seems likely to me is that their mid and late game power spikes may be gigantic, because they ignore growth completely as a faction. They only require raw materials to level up their cities, and when they capture a new tower, they have the Skaven mechanic of being able to trade food for instant tier 3, tier 4, or tier 5 settlements. Only this time, they're trading labor, not food. This, along with the ability to skip construction timers by spending that labor, implies that Chaos Dwarfs will be able to develop very quickly as long as they have a solid stockpile of resources to fall back on. If you are an established empire, say at turn 70, 80, or turn 100, fighting on many fronts and rolling in slaves, you should be able to quickly increase those unit caps to make use of your better units and funnel labor into your frontline cities, which are immediately turning into unassailable fortresses, because when you capture a new city or a new tower, you can immediately make it tier 4 or tier 5, presuming you have enough labor to do so. That could get insanely powerful if there aren't any scaling percentage-based labor costs designed to slow that kind of tactic down. So yeah, using a lot of the same mechanics from other races, slaves from Dark Elves, unit caps from Tomb Kings, Skaven construction on newly captured settlements, but all of those are logical and thematic for Chaos Dwarfs as well, so I don't really have a problem with them being reused here. What I want to focus on now are the elements we don't know, or at least haven't been confirmed quite yet. One of the big ones for me, just from a geographical standpoint, is that I want the River Ruin to be a navigable river, one that any faction can use. This river is essentially the eastern border of the Darklands. It's the river Tsar Nagron sits upon, and is poisoned with its industrial filth, and it's the river Dawizar Ironclads and their more than respectable navy uses to patrol and raid. On top of that, the starting position for Astragoth Ironhand is in Uzkalak. At least in the gameplay that was shown, I don't believe it had a port, and that needs to change if true, because the reason it still has so much strategic value in the year 2502 of the Imperial calendar is that an underground sea canal that was constructed in the year 1000, 1500 years earlier, connected the Falls of Doom, Tsar Nagrund, the River Ruin, and the Sea of Chaos all together. Why is that important? Well, it meant that the Chaos Dwarf Navy now had unfettered access to both the Sea of Dread in the south near Kugath Plaguefather, and the frozen Sea of Norska and the Wastes up north, which meant all kinds of gains on the economic front. Easy routes to sell arms and armor in the north, easier raids into Nordland and the Southlands via their navy, 2 oceans and a big river connecting it all together. Huge for the Chaos Dwarf Empire. That should be reflected in Total War as well. By that same token, military convoys are a great start in that you can sell armaments, labor, or raw materials to other factions and exchange them for money or other goods that you need at any given time, but that should not be the extent of your trains and what they're capable of. I think you guys know my stance on trains from a battle perspective. We've mentioned it a few times, but to reiterate, in tabletop, each train was pulled by either an Iron Demon war engine with twin steam cannonades, blasting hot shrapnel and curse-laden shot into enemy battle lines while running them over with huge mass and gigantic metal prongs. So think a steam tank being used like a chariot, firing while it does. Or they could be pulled by Skullcrackers, a melee variant with whirling pickaxes, saws, and sledgehammers with a bonus for walls, gates, and fortifications. Behind these carriage haulers, which of course could be used separately as single entity units as well, you would connect magma cannons, Deathstreaker artillery, or the mighty Dreadquake mortar, which, as we've said before, is about as powerful, perhaps even more so, than Queen Mama Bess from the Vampire Coast. This thing is scary as artillery pieces come in the Warhammer series. We still don't have confirmation exactly how this all will work in game in terms of trains and how they connect together, but the way I see it, there are 2 options. Either there will be separate units for each individual combination, combining 1 carriage and 1 artillery piece together, or there will be a fully customizable setup where you can hook up 2 or 3 artillery in any form and order you see fit to any carriage hauler you see fit. And that right there is the dream for me. That is what I want to see. Fully customizable, fully controllable, you can hook and unhook, if not in battle, at least in pre-battle, and put any artillery and any Iron Demon in any configuration you like. But that's just on the battle side. There's a campaign side here too, and I'd argue it's just as important, if not more so. The cool thing about Iron Demon war engines, and Chaos Dwarf trains in general, is that they don't require the use of railways to get around. Built-up infrastructure and railways certainly help a lot. It does allow them to get around faster on a set path, but these things are powered by well-oiled machinery, crafty engineering, and demonic presence. They can go off-road just fine. So what I really want to see from them are two separate mechanics straight from Fall of the Samurai. The first is the transport of armies quickly across the Darklands. There's really no other faction in the world that has the infrastructure required to move armies vast distances in hours, not days. The closest anyone comes to it are demons who can just portal hop and materialize out of thin air. That's not really fair, but when it comes to realistic methods of transportation, the Chaos Dwarfs have it down pat, and the Darklands train system, more than just transporting arms and armor, should be able to transport armies from the Black Fortress in the south to Uzkalak in the north on the same turn with movement to spare afterwards. This is exactly how trains function in Fall of the Samurai in 1860s Japan. The other part of that is a feature we've seen both in Fall of the Samurai and for Black Arcs for the Dark Elves, and I'm of course talking about bombardments. During the Meiji Restoration, we were seeing naval bombardments from ironclads, off-map artillery that could straight up devastate a unit or even an army, and it wasn't even on the battlefield. That is the thing firing all those shells, and much the same idea with the zone of influence on Black Arcs, extending from the sea or the Vampire Coast in the form of bound spells and sea shanties, which emulated the same thing. Only this time, we're talking off-map artillery support from Dreadquake mortars, danger close fire missions, and steel rain from the train chilling just out of sight. For a lot of this stuff, cooldowns or raw material cost to fuel the trains would be required, so you can't just infinitely spam and abuse them. Think about how goddamn epic that would be to just blow up half an maybe not half an army, you know what I'm saying, get a disgusting off-map shot from a Dreadquake that isn't even on the battlefield. It's just coming in to give you some danger close support. That would be sick. So yeah, both on the transporting side and the artillery side, probably some cooldowns or raw material costs just so you can't use that every single battle or every single time. You would have to think about positioning and when best to use those abilities. But if CA wants to do trains right, I think all three of those elements should be present, and the blueprint for making those features work already exists in Total War. So yeah, those are my ideas and thoughts for now. Please do let me know if you noticed anything else of interest in the gameplay posted before, or if you have some fun ideas for Chaos Dwarf mechanics of your own, and I will see you all in the next one. Praise Hashut.